say to you, this is Anagalactic on the 6th day of February, Thursday, here in Chico, California. We are in the synthetic phase of a study of cosmic geometry. The synthetic phase is the exciting phase. It's once you've gotten all of your solutions using the scientific process, culminating in the scientific method for any validatable proof sequence, then you've achieved your goals. And that's what's happened. I've achieved my goals. Now, you can't call it science, although it's part of science. Every discovery originates with one man. That's tautological. But science is consensual and communal and communicative. Now, the communal aspect today is dramatically emphasized because of the networking capability we have basically at the speed of light. And we're internetworked now. Everybody has their face pressed to their cell phone. They're progressively becoming divorced from, I'll just say, physical reality and immersed in an imaginary reality, which is basically the human gene pool of us living humans. About half of all the humans who've ever lived are alive right now. That can be proved mathematically, but there's always a footnote. Always a footnote. And the same thing, of course, is true of the populations of the millions of species on the Earth. That the ones that are alive right now are just a fraction of all of the members of any species. Now, the reason I bring that up is because it's so important now to get a grip on reality. And reality is so elusive. Why is reality elusive? For one thing, it keeps moving. You can't get a fix on it. Of course, we imagine that we can. For instance, with a linear distance, we certainly can use that to build pyramids, and finally, a couple of thousand years later, or a few thousand years later, building rockets to get to the moon and outer space. Well, just take a look at that for a second so we can get a grip on human reality in some way. About half of us who have ever lived are alive now. About 8 billion people. So what happened to the others? Well, they're in some imaginary space. And it depends purely on philosophy, which goes to religion, of course. Religion is a province of philosophy. You could put it the other way around, but yeah, there's the human equation again. We just can't get anything exact. We can't do anything exactly. We have to guess. Well, rational logic is meant to lead us out of guesswork, because guesswork leads to superstition. You guess that the sun is going around the earth. Why? Because it's obvious that it is. Well, I think you see the flaw in that logic. Well, it is possible not to see that flaw in the logic. So rational logic is extremely important for humans. And this is what makes humankind, or the human race, the right use of the word race is of humans. And it's a once-only term, like the name of God. And just to branch off a little, those of you who know me a little bit better than you wanted to, perhaps, know that I used to be a Bible scholar, and I claim, grandiosely perhaps, but I mean well, I'm the foremost Bible scholar of all time. Why? Well, that's contextual, by the way. That would be megalomaniac and grandiose if I didn't contextualize what I just said. Because the greatest anything of all time is really saying a lot. So that's a beauty pageant contest which never works out to a single winner. And I love to tell stories, but I did actually penetrate the Tetragrammaton, and I published, and all my works were burned up in the campfire, all 6 books that I wrote, including a manuscript in progress, and my database of all my thousands of photographs of galaxies and galaxy clusters and quasars, diagrams from Halton Christian Arp, probably the greatest astrophysicist after Fritz Vicky who ever lived. But when I say that I was the greatest. It's contextual. For instance, what's the name of God? Well, according to Islam, there are a billion names of God. Or according to Arthur C. Clarke writing about that myth, there are 9 billion names of God. And it's a great story by Arthur C. Clarke, if you'd like to look that up. It's not the Sentinel, but it's one of his earlier short stories about the 9 billion names of God. Well, God has 9 billion names from the point of view of fractalized humanity, sure. Probably would have 8 billion names at this particular moment in time. God would have 8 billion names. Why? Because there are 8 billion individual humans. But what is the name that God said his name was? Well, then you have to go into mythology. Well, that's what I studied for 30 years, was mythology. The mythology of the Bible. And a myth is not a lie. A myth is a theory. It's actually a little bit different than that. It's called a metaphor. And an extended metaphor is a parable. And you may recognize the word parable. If you're as old as I am, you may recognize the word parable from your traumatized youth, where you learned to hate God because it was forced down your throat. And now you hate religion. And so you call yourself an atheist because you're a crybaby. No, you have to grow up and grow a pair. A man has to become a man, not with a squirt. That's not how it's done, and it's not with a fist. It's with your mind. So for your dancing and dining pleasure, since I'm getting ready to depart this level of reality, I am a little over 70 years old. I know I don't look it. And you think, well, he must have taken care of himself all his life. Kind of. Kind of, yeah, but not really. I was blessed with good genes from my father and mother. Honor thy father and mother, that thy days may be long in the land. Well, the third commandment is just totally overlooked by Christianity and Islam, although not completely. And I can't talk about the other religion because I have a warning issued against me for my extremely nasty comments, apparently, about what's going on in Palestine. And you're not allowed to criticize the murderers. The genocidal murderers that run that state, and I won't say which one or I'll get another warning, which turns into a strike. And I had a strike against me early. It was from the use of profanity under the influence of suds. And I was humiliated. I felt awful because I knew that I was wrong. I had transgressed. Well, this is an open forum. I mean, I shouldn't be talking about Israel at all. I'm sorry. I'm a wise man. I'm trying to help you. You have no way of helping me, and I don't want or need your help, but you certain the fuckly duty need my help. So over here, you'll see we have Ruggiero Bošković's theory of natural philosophy. Well, why do I have that in such grotesque... Here's why. This is a book by Luca Guzzardi that you can get for free. And it's about 200 pages long, and it is literally about Bošković's theory. But look at that caption. Points, distances, determinations. That doesn't sound like natural philosophy to me. That's because in Bošković's day, which was circa 1750, he was dealing with science, but it wasn't called science. The word science had not been invented. So the synonym for science in Ruggiero's day was natural philosophy. Well, natural is the key word there. It's not general philosophy. It's scientific philosophy. Natural refers to nature. Well, that's the universe. All right. So we're scrolling down here. It's a dedication. Guzzardi is an amazing scholar operating out of Italy, and this was translated, obviously, I believe. Well, he'll say, and then, while he was finishing this book, his mother got sick and died. This is such a common occurrence. I don't know if it's Jungian synchronicity, But as a man is finishing a very important book, at least in his own eyes, one of his relatives will die. And it just, of course, it is a very important psychological event. I'm just showing you this is an extensive book. I'm getting to something, but this is the introduction given by Guzzardi. And look at that. Diagrammatical representation of the supposedly instantaneous annihilation of velocity, according to Bošković, 1745. Well, without going into that, let's keep going. This is all in the introduction. This is incredibly deep stuff. And that is the Bošković force curve. The Bošković force curve. If you have a modicum of intelligence and you are called in this direction, I'm telling you, from now on and for the rest of your life, you need to study this curve. There's a reason for that. There's a reason Guzzardi wrote this book. Roger Anderton out of England is promoting Bošković's work, but currently I can't reach Anderton. He knows who I am, and he would like to respond, I think. He showed favorable signs toward me when I left a comment in one of his videos, which are not well watched. But the man is a dynamo of activity, but alas, as so many scientists are these days, such as Alexander Unziker out of Deutschland, well, not Guzzardi, but Anderton, although he's done monumental work and translated Bošković, he can translate that language. So he's an amazing man, but he's totally out of reach. I have sympathy for such men because he's caught in the trap of Einsteinian relativity. He's one of the world's foremost experts on, I guess, what you would call alternate views of Einsteinian relativity. And because that occupies so much of his mind and so much of his attention, he can't really pay attention to someone like me. It's perfectly reasonable that he would ignore me. He is ignoring me. I offered to collaborate with him, just exchange a couple of letters or something, or talk on the phone, or anything. I'm open to anything right now. I have to be. It's part of the duty of a scientist who reaches the level I've reached, which is the top. But Anderton cannot respond to me because I'm a nobody and he's somebody important. That's just the way it is. It's not like sour grapes, like, well, you naughty man, you didn't respond to me. No, that's not how science works. So the long and short of it is that a lot of top-notch physicists know about Bošković's discoveries, which amount to this curve. And I'll be showing you some other things, as I have in the past, on why this curve, it solves the quantum paradox and explains space-time relativity. It is so profound that I still get, well, you can see the hair on my arm is mounting up as if I had the arm of a bear. Because I'm so excited, you can see the hair standing up on my arm. This part was hurt in the fire, so it can't grow hair anymore. I like to have fun. I like to drink beer. I like to make jokes. But it's because I'm intense in every direction. That's been known of me. That was told to me so many times. First of all, how come you're so happy? I've heard that. The other one is, how come you're so intelligent? Neither one of these are meant as compliments. They're statements of wonder and fear. But I did grow a pair somewhere along the way, although I don't remember quite when. And now I'm also cantankerous because I don't like injustice. I don't like Israel at all. I don't like the people who govern Israel. And now I have a warning issued against me because I used a word in a hateful context, which could have implied to some maniac out in the world somewhere, oh, he's telling me that I need to hate humans. I've never even come close to saying that. But I'm still wrong, though. I'm not saying YouTube is wrong to give me it. They gave me a strike for using profane language under the influence of beer, as I've told you. But that was early on, because I was having fun, and I got a little, late at night after a little tea mini martinis. I don't drink hard liquor, I just drink Old Chico lager. But it's enough, it's about 5%, and if you drink 4 to 6 of them, you're liable to start using profanity. And then the warning comes off, I think it's 3 months. And the restrictions, I don't remember what it was, but it was enough to be felt. I mean, you have to have punitive retribution against some maniac who's drinking beer and just using the F word. That video and several others, I really received my walloping with a repentant attitude. But now, you make comments about Israel. Well, inevitably, especially under the influence of beer, which I've never completely given up, you may lapse and not say Israel or Zion. You can say Zion and Zionism, even though, as you can imagine, Israeli or Zionist, what you don't want to do is refer to the tribe. Because they're protected, for Christ's sake. There used to be such a thing as anti-Semitism. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. I find it just totally illogical and irrational that anybody would hate someone because of the way God made them. I mean, if you're born, I don't know. I don't want to do this. I don't want to get another warning. I'm trying to be helpful. But you see this sensitivity to hatred. I mean, the promulgation of hatred is well known in the history of man. I mean, Hitler's Germany, the people who endured that are all dead now. There may be one person left, I heard recently, but of course time marches on. If you're 99 years old, the odds are you're not going to make it to 100. So there may not be anybody left who actually remembers the Holocaust. But I remember growing up under the shadow of the Holocaust, and the people who were persecuted, whom I am not allowed to name, because it might incite someone to hatred again. I don't see that that's reasonable, but of course the whole history of mankind is completely unreasonable, so YouTube has to protect, well, it's really protecting its own platform against maniacs who might be, neo-Nazis or something. Oh, man. I mean, recently I took a big chance, and I think I've privatized this video, but I used the N-word. And it's funny, when you say the N-word, it's synonymous with the word that begins with N. But you're allowed to say the N-word, but you still have to be cautious. You can't incite hatred. That's called racism. Racism is one of the most grotesque evils of all time. And, you have racists still at large. I would say things have improved somewhat, but I'm sorry, the problem will never go away. It could rise again tomorrow. Well, currently there is a racist action going on against the Semitic people. I'm allowed to say this. They're Palestinians. So the Israelis, whatever they are intent on eliminating that. They consider the Palestinians a racial group. So the Israelis are racist. They're morbidly, violently, extremely racist. They're genocidally racist. So the tables have turned. And I'm not going to leave that stone unturned. I'm not here just to tell you about numbers or geometry. Although, of course, that is what I'm doing. But why? Let's get back on track. I was going to tell you the singular nature of the Tetragrammaton, but that's religion, and I could get a warning. And I'm going to make fun of YouTube but not YouTube. They're very generous toward me, and you don't bite the hand that feeds you, okay? But let's get back on track. I promise I always listen to my videos first before I release it, and then after, as if I'm listening to it for the first time. I take notes. I will come back to those 3 open threads that I just left open. But today we want to talk about something like this anyway. Let me show you something else, so we'll get going here. We'll turn that off and turn this on. Here's just something I'm going to read so that you'll know my thoughts. I just wrote this morning. Light speed is the rate of time in space. What then is light length? Well, light length is Planck time. What is Planck time? It's the ratio of space into time, right? It's actually the reverse of that. It's the ratio of time into space. That's Planck time. That's why nobody can compute it. It's the same age-old quantum paradox. The quantum of time, there is no such thing. Technically, there's no such thing as the Planck length either. Is there such a thing as light length and light speed? Yes, light is real. But is space real? Hesitate before you answer. It's relatively real. Is time real? It's relatively real. Is light real? Yes, light is real. That is what we don't understand. Now I'm going to read a quote from Lancelot Law White, who wrote in 1961. I've covered this in 2 videos. A very good short book I well recommend reading. You can get it for free. It's called An Essay on Atomism, which I just abbreviate atomism. It was Roger Enderton who turned me on to this book. Thank you, Roger, although I know you don't give a hoot about me because you're too busy to listen to a rational man. You're too busy with your stupid Einsteinian upstart physics, which you'll never solve because you're too stupid to listen to me. So that's for you, Roger Enderton, whom I love. All right. As we have seen, if a unified theory is possible, the laws which cover the new micro-world as well as the old macro-world must be generalizations of the known laws. Think about that. To be reached by dropping unnecessary restrictions concealed somewhere in the quantum mechanics of 1929. Now, what does he mean by that? I know what he means, but you may be guessing. Let me give you a clue how to figure out what White is saying. He's very rational. He doesn't usually go out to this extent towards the philosophical area, but he's doing what a good theorist does. He's attempting to point theorists in the right direction so they can overcome the theory and get the solution. That's what I got. So he's talking about what a man would do to get the answer. And that's exactly what I did so that I did get the answer. So what is he suggesting? This will help you to know what I went through to get the answer so you can do it too. That's the whole meaning of science, is communication. All right. So what are the unnecessary restrictions concealed somewhere in quantum mechanics? It's the number system being used. It's a 1-component number system. All right. I discovered a 2-component number system that replaces complexity and solves for imaginarity and infinity. Well, that would be, if it can be proved, the most important discovery in 120 years, if not of all time. So yes, I sound megalomaniac. Well, that's why I drink beer. All right. I don't want to be megalomaniac. It's somewhat unavoidable from a subjective perspective on your part. Am I completely out of my mind? Well, there is always a small possibility of that. I am pretty sure I've disproved it to myself. Not sure I could disprove it to anybody else, though. So the theoretician is not completely in the dark in exploring the nucleus, but his lamp is the wrong color. And I think you know that that refers directly to what White does not know exactly, but which I do know exactly. What lamp? What do you mean by the color of your lamp? It's the number system that's screwed up. It's too simplistic. Relativism implies two quantities. That's what relativity it is. It's the relative aspect of two completely different quantities. And you can't use a one component number to get what amounts to the rate of change between them. That's a two component number. Newton proved that. It's a rate. That is a fraction. There are two numbers in a fraction. So light speed is two linear numbers. And they're in, I would say, correct relationship. But how come nobody's noticed that light speed is not a number? It's a rate. A rate is not a number. Now you see, the illusion is that, for instance, if the rate is indeed 300,000 to 1 kilometers per second, that is the given speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second. It's obviously not exactly that, but it has been artificially exactified because it's so constant. But it's a two-componency number, which means it's not a number. But it looks like a number. It's a fraction, and so we use division to reduce it to a linear number. So the linear number is 300,000 proportion 1. But they're two different data types. It's 300,000 kilometers, that's a distance, a linear distance, over time, which is a completely different data type. Well, one of the secrets to penetrating that strange difference in types of numbers is to realize that a two-component number represents curvature. It represents a circle or a sphere. It has to be a two-component number. And then you might ask, is a circle a two-component number? It has to be, because it's in a two-dimensional plane. So to represent a circle, you need two linear numbers. Well, sine and cosine are not linear numbers. They're irrational numbers. In a grid, you have to have quantization on an index, which means everything is a whole number in the grid. But we're not measuring the grid. We're measuring something that goes in between all the points on the grid. That's a circle. Now that must be a two-component number. What about the sphere? Obviously that is one dimension higher, even if you conceive the plane to be a circular plane instead of a squared plane. It's a circularized plane. That would be concentric circles measuring distance out or in, instead of left, right, up, down, and in, out, which does not work because one of those components has to remain imaginary. That would be usually conceived as the z-axis, but I showed you yesterday that things disappear in 3D space. They pass out of existence as you rotate. That's called gimbal lock, or division by zero. That does not occur with a two-component number system, because the two-component number system is based on the multiplicative identity instead of the additive identity. The additive identity is zero. That's an imaginary infinity. Right? I've proved it, so just accept that for now. But what about the quantum jump from 1 to 2? This would be 1, 2, 3, 4 in circular space. How do you do that? You do it with a mathematical system that I did not so much invent as discover. It's just been sitting there looking at us. The dyadic fractions, the power of two fractions, compose a separate number space that I claimed yesterday is 6 times bigger than what we can measure. Why would I say that it's 6 times bigger? What am I saying? That the proportion that exists between the radius of a circle, which is its linear component, and the surface, which is its circular component, you know that the ratio between those two numbers is 2 pi. 2 pi is a number which occurs in all physics equations now. 2 pi is ubiquitous. That's an irrational number. So that is the relationship, mathematically, between the radius and the circle. So the circumference is said to be 2 pi. You have heard it, you know that pi is the relationship between the diameter and we don't use the diameter anymore. Of course, it still can be used. It's simply twice the radius. But it doesn't really make it's not simple enough. The radius, being half of the diameter, is the correct ratiocinity. So that we say that pi is the number on the circle with respect to the diameter. But if you say the radius, which all physicists do now, it's 2 pi. And that's not 3.14159. It's twice that number. That's 6.28 ... So 6.28 is a fundamental dimensionless constant of the universe. And it has a name which was assigned to it. Euler assigned a name to that number, but it never caught on. In fact, he wanted to call it E, but I guess that left him free to use E for something else. A lot of people say that Euler named it after himself. No, he didn't. That's ridiculous. Euler would not do that. Only modern men do that, but it's a tradition that goes back a long ways to name rational concepts after the discoverer. It's the stupidest tradition, but we can't get rid of it now. But he said it was E, but it was renamed in the 21st century, believe it or not, when a consortium of mathematicians around the world got together and had a party. They started communicating with each other, and they said, hey, we got to drum up some support for our new number, which is a new name for 2 pi. And they called it tau. And tau is interesting. It's like the pi symbol. You've seen the cute pi symbol that 3 blue 1 brown uses. An amazing young man out of Stanford whom I admire so much. Is unbelievable. That guy is powerhouse. And his technology, I just drool over it. But everyone loves his pi symbol. It has 2 little legs. Well, he attached eyes to the pies, eyes on the pies. But the right number is tau, and the consortium was right, but of course it's too late to change anything in science. Science does not have a feedback system. It's one reason why it's just plummeting at accelerating speed toward a void of fractality that's driven science psychotic. So one way to kind of start to correct this situation would, first of all, to use the right numbers. You don't use pi, you use tau. Pi is it's more complex, but tau is a much simpler relationship. It's the radius to the surface. That's 6.28. Well, the right question to ask now is, what is the ratio of the radius to the sphere? It turns out to be 12 point something, because it's another 2-to-1 relationship, which I apparently discovered. But because the surface value of the sphere changes according to a higher order law than the radius to the circle maintains that 6.28 relationship. As the radius expands, the surface expands, the constant does not change. What is that constant for the sphere? It's about 12.56. So what does that mean? It means that our number system is crippled. It means it can only see about 1/6 of reality, because everything in the universe is spherical. Okay, so that gives us our introduction to the number system that I discovered. I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground here. And I don't mean to go too fast, but I also want to maintain the synthetic continuity. This is the most important phase of science. whenever it occurs, the synthetic stage. So we're going to turn this off, and I want you to see this. And this is something you can bring up on your screen if you wish. This is called GeoGebra. I've given several lectures on how to use GeoGebra. It's probably the most amazing tool for geometry of all time. It's free. That's the amazing part. It was invented and used in Europe, in Slovakia, somewhere around there. But then it was bought by an Indian educational consortium, and it's now their property. And so they don't have to release it for free. They do. They release it for free. You can use it online, so you don't have to download it. I much prefer a desktop version. This one is the desktop version. So what I'm going to do here is just show you a few things about the circle, which I think might amaze you. Now, the purpose of this particular presentation is kind of diffuse because I want to show you a lot of things, but I do intend to concentrate on the Boschkovich force curve, which, by the way, that curve that you saw going up and down, it is a sinusoidal wave, but it's showing the intersection of two spherical force fields. And every sine wave represents something in circular space. And whenever you see the sine wave, you know, there's sine squared plus cos squared equals 1. That's where we get our probability theory from for quantum mechanics. Those squared numbers cannot penetrate to circular space because they're not two-component numbers. You add them. According to the Pythagorean theorem, you're using the additive identity of the line. Well, we don't want that anymore. And this is the turning point of science. We need to switch number systems to the integral number system, which is 12 times more powerful in volume space and is 6 times more powerful for accuracy, 6 times more powerful for circular space. Well, that's power. Instead of using this simple transition to the integral number system, we use complexity and hypercomplexity. Those are tools. They're actually new operators. And calculus and hypercalculus. Dirac discovered hypercomplexity. Einstein discovered hypercalculus. This is going the wrong way, but it's contextual because it's superpositional. If you feel that you're forced to use linear numbers, and there's a very good reason for that, they contain the computable numbers. But what nobody's noticed, not even from computational science, is that the computable numbers, first of all, have to be representable numbers on a computer. Those are the dyadic fractions. Those are the only actual numbers. And they're fractions, so they're two-component numbers. Well, that is a match on light speed and space-time. Space-time is a two-component concept. Light speed is a two-component concept. Why are we using one-component numbers when we could be directly representing relationships? It's because mankind is stupid. It's also being controlled by an evil power. Whenever I go down on that vein, I always get into trouble, because then you have to make some kind of statement about what is this evil power. Doesn't that sound a little superstitious? Yeah, well, is murder rational? Is genocide rational? Are prisons and jails rational? If you're a humanist, you might say yes or no. If you're a philosopher, you might say yes or no. But as a scientist, no. Completely insane, completely illogical. So why is that happening? An evil power. I'm just going to leave it at that. So we want the good power. That's called rational logic because the universe is rational. It's not entirely rational down here on the surface of the world. It doesn't seem rational at all, but we get a piece of the pie if you turn on your rational mind and leave it on and learn the rules and learn everything you can about rational logic, propositional logic, mathematical logic, geometric relationships. You're getting out of the sinking ship. you're following the way of heaven. Sure, it's just the beginning. Maybe you're not thinking of heaven at all. You will. It's either that or hell. And I won't go on that vein because that sounds like religion. No, it's not religion. It's a binary choice of your future. You have the power to change your own present and future. No one can interfere with you. But you're on your own then. Nobody can help you either. Well, the universe can. And some people interpret that as a higher intelligence. I'm just going to tell you point blank, for your dancing and dining pleasure, maybe you'll drink some beer and think about it and suddenly become enlightened. Who knows with you? But I'll tell you what I do know. And no, I won't. So what we want to do now is explore some basic geometry. And here, this is the opening screen of GeoGebra Classic, which is on my desktop. You can download this for free. Or you can use the online version if you're paranoid or pathetic. I do have my own preferences. I am human. I'm sorry to be subjective there, but I love to have fun. I'm having a blast. I'm also ready to pass away. I'm 70 years old and I'm in failing health. So I don't want to alarm you, and I'm not trying to get your money. I never ask for money. Don't send me money, but if you do, I'll probably keep it because I desperately need it. But I'll never reduce myself to the state of a beggar. That's in the Bible. I have never yet seen a man of God begging bread. That's in the Holy Scripture, whether you believe it or not. It's in there, honey. So I am happy. I'm ready. I'm actually a little bit anxious to leave. Nobody wants to die, but you will. And if you learn to face it, you just might be able to gain some peace of mind. Well, I've done that. I cannot share that. I tried for 30 years to share that, and I got crucified just as my master told me I would. He said, "Look at me. Now look at what they're going to do to me once you see it. That's you. If you want to go with me on the way of heaven, according to my knowledge from heaven, then you are going to be crucified also." I don't think that's escapable. I went through it. It's devastating. It's devastating. I was excommunicated from a major church simply because as I very commonly do, just express. Actually, this was over birthday cake, and the new pastor said something about the Sunday Sabbath, because that was one of the tenets of the church that I just ignore. I just like hanging around with people who study the Bible. Not anymore. I won't go near them. I don't go near churches. I fear them in a sense, because they represent something to me of enormous evil. So churches are nobody's idea of fun, but I was a fun-loving guy, you know. I did a lot of risky things in my youth, but I was a scholar in that sense of studying the Tetragrammaton and the Holy Scriptures in the original languages. And it got me hurt. It got me hurt so badly, I detest religion now. But I still didn't turn to science because I also am brain dead, or was, because of the force of my environment. My scholastic training, my encounters with churches, whatever I did, gave me a new perspective on life, which was a little more mature and far more painful. You don't stay innocent forever. Yeshua didn't. He never took a dime. He went around healing people. He had the capacity to raise the dead. He could heal blindness. He could have fixed the whole nation. He was destined to be king. But alas, a certain group of people I'm not allowed to name, his own people, ganged up on him and murdered him. And he said, as he was hanging there from the cross, "Told you so. You'll be up here with me. I say unto you this day, you'll be with me in paradise." Did that look like paradise to you? Well, 7 weeks later, he lifted off in a way Elon Musk can't even comprehend. So he's the first space traveler, the first cosmonaut. And it should be cosmonaut because the commies got into space before the shit-headed Americans. And I could get in trouble for saying that. That sounds racist. What, are you a racist against the white people? I have to be so cautious. I'm just not. I would rather unbridle than protect myself. Yeshua didn't protect himself. Why should I? I'm ready to go. I'm ready to leave. I've got more than one foot in the other realm already. In a sense, I can hardly wait to pass out of this existence. It's like it was said in The Green Mile. That big, I can't say black, that big, dark-skinned man who was in one of the cages in the prison, when he was told it's time for you to go and be electrocuted. Even though he hadn't done anything wrong, it's just, oh, Stephen King's masterpiece. Well, his masterpiece was The Shawshank Redemption, but The Green Mile is right up there at the top literature of all time because of what this dark-skinned man said, who had healing powers. He said, in response to, hey, it's time for you to walk the Green Mile, we're going to strap you in so you can't move, and we're going to run an electrical current through your body that'll fry you. So that's tomorrow. And he said, you's be doing me a favor. Hanging around down here is like having ground glass in my brain. That's what it's like for me. Observing Israel, observing Russia, although that's a much more low-key situation. War is not low-key. It's out of control insanity. Well, that's everywhere. But it's also in science. And I'm trying to do my job as a rational scientist. Well, I can't. It's not allowed. In the same way that Yeshua was not allowed to heal the earth or anybody because a certain group of his own phenotype say, well, you know, that would certainly hurt our money system of taxation. You would be removing us from power if you were king. So they murdered him in cold blood. And that's Christianity. Same thing happens to a rational scientist. I will not be heard. Roger Anderton cannot respond to me. Dr. Unziker cannot respond to me. Kurtjai Mungal cannot respond to me. Nobody is allowed to listen to me. Why? That's very difficult to say. I've been broadcasting for 3 years. I've made over 850 video lectures. About 3/5 of which had to be privatized because I couldn't take any chances. The strike, actually the warning that was issued just 2 days ago against me was for something that I produced over a year ago. It was only like 12 minutes long. It's been removed. I could republish it. I still have the copy. I'm not even sure what was in it, but I was told that I'm not supposed to make statements that might engender hatred toward any religious, cultural, that's normal, that's good, that rule, well, I apparently violated it by stating the truth. But I'm sure that I was at fault because sometimes I lapse and I forget that there are insane people that you're not supposed to provoke. So insane people are protected. The group in Israel that's genocidally attacking their own brothers, they're protected. Because of people like Ku Klux Klan, I guess, or neo-Nazis, well, they might go, oh, he's giving us the go. Let's kill them all, because Great Uncle Sam told us to. This is what YouTube fears, because those people actually exist. And I, just kind of, I guess, give that profile. Well, I don't want to, but it's my own responsibility. So I do have a warning against me. And if you don't see any videos for like 3 or 4 days at sometime in the near future, it'll be because I got whacked. Because I was too loose with my tongue. And there's nothing I can do about that. So I may go off the air either by my own death, or I could be homeless pretty soon because I have no money to support myself. And I'm dying of a horrendous lung disease that was incited by the campfire, which poisonous smoke I breathed for 3.5 hours at its maximum intensity. And now I'm on 3 medications just to keep my bronchial tubes open. So why am I laughing? Because I don't care. Because the discoveries I've made satisfy my equation. I know what reality and consciousness are. I know everything there is to know about light speed, quantum mechanics, and cosmology so far beyond the norm that it's supernatural. I definitely have been gifted in the same way that I was gifted to decipher the Tetragrammaton. The greatest discovery by far in the history of religion was my discovery of the actual original meaning of the Tetragrammaton. And I'm just going to tell you, I'm not allowed to tell you what it means. Although I will, because it's not racist. I'm not allowed to tell you because you cannot understand it. But I'll tell you anyway, because you might. The Tetragrammaton is derived from Haya, which means to be. I talked with Jehovah's Witnesses, as many as 7 of them in my home, because I invited them in those days. I'm not afraid of Jehovah's Witnesses, but they are a church, and so they are... I don't want to say anything against the church, though. I could get another warning and a strike and be off the air. That's not actually how it works. You have to do something really horrendous to be dropped from YouTube. What they do is they restrict your rights for about 3 months. And I told you it happened to me. I don't want that to happen. So I'm not going to tell you to go, burn all the churches. By the way, Luther went through this. In the Reformation that Luther started, he found out that many of his followers, which would be incipient Lutherans, were going around to Catholic churches and destroying icons and ruining, the whole superstitious setup because they were Lutherans, not Catholics. And Luther flew into a rage. He also was a big beer drinker, just as I. And he and I have similar courses. It's almost uncannily similar. And Luther said, this is not about destruction. This is not about hatred. This is about salvation. Justification by faith does not mean you attack those who are against it. You don't attack the whatever group that was just because they are evil. You don't attack evil. Good does not attack evil. It's quite the contrary. Evil attacks good. Yeshua didn't attack Israel when he arrived. He healed everybody. Well, that was a bozo no-no, because then the ones who are gathering the money at his father's house from people trying to come to worship the name of God, they're saying, well, it costs money to get in, but we can change your currency. Oh, you have coconuts from wherever you're from? Well, bring your coconuts forward. We'll give you a couple of denarii so you can go in and see the museum to God's name. Well, Yeshua upset the money changers' tables. That's why they crucified him. That's the actual reason. It wasn't because he was healing people. It's because he touched Satan's money. And I'm going to leave it at that. But the name of God is a once only. Hebrew has several forms and tenses that go way beyond anything in English. And a whole slew of them have to do with causality. So you can say to move is a verb, but to cause to move is a variation of that verb. The same thing holds true in the one who is. say unto them, I am hath sent me unto you. And then he said, this is what you'll say, since they want to know my name. I am the one causing being. That's infinitive causative. That can only apply to one entity. Infinitive causative, the entity, the consciousness, the being that produces reality. Now you see perhaps a little clearer why I don't like pseudoscientific discussion about reality, because I know what reality is. And if you're like Richard Dawkins, and here I have to be cautious again, who says you cannot be a scientist unless you deny the existence of the one causing being. So he's antithetically postured against the eternal name of the Creator. And Dawkins, therefore, is allied with the other side of that binary split. Either you believe in that entity, or you don't. If you don't, you're Dawkins. If you do, you're screwed. Because Dawkins will find you and kill you. Not he himself, but the power that he serves. It's the same power that killed Yeshua. It's also the same power that took down Fritz Zwicky when he wouldn't go along with the Big Bang. And it's also the same power that took down another of my teachers, Christian Halton Arp. It's actually Halton Christian Arp. Those two are undoubtedly the greatest astrophysicists of all time, but neither one of them would go along with the government program of the Big Bang. So, what I'm doing is showing you how to get out of that. And in order to do that, we need to turn over here, and you'll see in this list, there's all kinds of choices, graphing. And that produces this simple grid, which you can click and drag to center it, and then you can scroll up to get less granularity. Now you see we're down to the unit. There's one over here. I hope you can see that. And I'm going to use a tool here to draw a circle. I click up here, and it says circle with center through point. If I highlight that, it tells me down at the bottom, once I click what to do next, it will be to select the center point and then point on the circle. That's not very well stated. That's not exactly what you do. What it should say, and let me highlight it again, it should say select center point and then move the pointer to create a circle. So that's what we're going to do. Now I've done so. I click on the center point and now move the mouse. And there's the circle. We want it to go to 1. This is a smart program. It knows to snap on 1. And there's our circle. Now we can compute the circumference. This is a unit circle. Virtually worshipped because it shows the mathematical relationship between the radius and the circumference. As you know, that is the number tau, which is the correct designator for 2 pi. And the reason for using tau rather than 2 pi is that 2 pi has a coefficient, whereas tau is a unit number. So, the unit number for what would be construed as the linear distance around the circle, which is a direct contradiction as I'll show you, but you could say that the circle has a value that can be reduced to 1. All right. You'll see that the vertical aspect is 1 and the horizontal aspect is 1. That is the proportion of 1 to 1. And the proportion of 1 to 1 is 1. And those are two different numbers. They are equivalent in a sense, because in order to use numbers at all, they must be linear. A 2-component number is not computable. And the number, for instance, any fraction on a computer has to be reducible to a linear number. A fraction is not a linear number. I know we were taught in school that fractions are linear numbers. No, they are not linear numbers. And I'll be showing that to you. Now, what we want to do today, and I promised this yesterday but never quite got around to it, what we want is to put the number 1 proportion 1, that's 1 over 1, onto the circumference. In order to do that, we have to know the constant conversion number, and that is tau. So how do we get 1 from the radius to the circumference? Now, by doing so, that will change the area of the circle. The area of the circle, you know, can be computed. For the unit circle, it's very well known. But when you change the circumference, which is there by 6.28, just rounding it off, that's 2 pi, that's the value of the circle as a linear number. Although actually that's not a linear number, because it's irrational. Technically, it's not a computable number because it's irrational. There's a lot of history behind that because of the confusion involved by not knowing that there's such a thing as a 2-component number system that is rational, that is closed, complete, and computable. There's actually 5 C's involved, as I've shown. But what we want is not this circle. What we want is a circle whose value at the surface, which would be the circumference, we want that number to be 1. But since it is a 2-component number, it's 1 over 1. And that's a different representation of the linear number 1, but it's directly reducible to 1. So quantitatively, they're identical, but relationally, they're not. 1 over 1 is a much different form of number than just a single component 1. All right, I hope you accept that. So what I'm going to do here is, first of all, click up here, because otherwise, if I just click, it thinks I want to make another circle. So I'm going to click here on the pointer, and then all you do is click on it again to make the message go away. Click on the circle, right-click, delete. Click on the circle, right-click, delete. Now what we... Now I think I can actually highlight all these at once. Oh, that just drags. Okay, so we don't want that. Or that. Or that. By the way, that can also be done over here. For C, I'm going to click over here on the left, and you see 3 dots that I'm clicking on now. You can delete it this way. Now what we want is to compose a circle whose surface value is 1. Try to guess how we might do that. Well, there's a mathematical formula for doing that, because the ratio between the radius and the circumference is 2 pi, which is tau. We're going to be using tau from now on because that is correct. 2 pi is incorrect. I'm quite a stickler for logical precision. All right, and I'm going to put this on pause. I have to go check something, but you won't notice the time lapse, but I'm just warning you, you'll notice a little click here. I'll be right back. All right, we're back. You can see I got a little dressed up there. I was still in my morning attire. This is a double Windsor knot. If you're interested in learning how to tie that, I can give you a link. Just leave a comment. Now, I'm sorry for the reflection off of these glasses, but it kind of protects you from having to see my rheumy eyes. Now, what we're going to do now is rather simple, and we have to begin with observing a mathematical relationship that exists on the unit circle, which is that the circumference has a value of approximately 6.28, a number which will become known as tau. It's already official to some extent. Science resists any form of change. It has no feedback mechanism any longer. But that won't stop us. We're rather outside the mainstream because we're dealing with the truth of the universe and not fantasy. All right, so what we want is to compose a circle that is the invert of the unit circle. Invert here is between linearization and circularization. Linearization defines the unit circle because nobody can compute the circle. And therefore you need an index in linear space which has the numbers, so we can use numbers to approximate the circle somehow, which is not a linear object in any way. It doesn't even respond to the grid, but we can force it with something called calculus, which is a form of averaging. It's trying to get a balance on two quantities that simply refuse to balance because you're using the wrong approach. Using two lines to get a circle. You know, there's an old proverb about that, squaring the circle. The height of absurdity. That's what this grid represents when trying to compute real space. It simply doesn't work. So what we want is a system that does work. Instead of the linear jump from 0 to 1 to get the index, which would be now considered the Planck length, meaning that there's no number less than 1. So it depends on scale. We are trying to get the smallest scale. That would be the Planck unit of linear separation. That's the distance from 0 to 1, which involves a contradiction called the quantum paradox. What we want is, in a sense, to make it worse. Because the actual quantum jump is not through linear space. So the Planck length is virtually a meaningless term, but it has the same meaning as the number 1 on the radius of a circle. So you can see that the actual Planck jump is 6.28 times greater in area, and that's a change of dimension. So in a sense this is incommensurable, and in a sense it's directly commensurable, but once again, that's a restatement of the quantum paradox. One of these days I'm going to try to compose a list of all the ways to define the quantum paradox, the quantum jump. The quantum, what does quantum mean? Well, it has two contexts. The quantum jump on the unit circle is the jump from the center to the surface measured on a line. What we want is the jump from the center to the surface, which sounds like, well, isn't that what we just did? Yes, but it's superpositional. There are two answers, depending on context. If you want the ratio of the circle to a computable number, then you must use the index of computable space, which is the Planck length. So the radius of the Planck circle is that unit, which has units. In other words, it's not just an abstract quantity. It's a contextual quantity that has to do with the nature of the line, which Euclid said, and stood the test of time for sure, is the way to define a line, is the shortest distance between 2 points. Well, this goes to entanglement because the shortest distance to 2 points is only in linear space. It can only be on one of those lines. It has to be on a line. It's not in any other direction or dimensionality. It's just straight distance. So that's pretty simple. It certainly has stood the test of time. That's the definition of distance. So that radius is a linear distance. So that is called the quantum jump because there is no actual numeracy between 0 and 1. In other words, the smallest distance is 1. What does that make 0? A dimensionless point is how Euclid defined it. That works for linear space. That remains consistent, but it does leave a very peculiar. You would have to put it here, just a philosophical problem of what then is zero. What is a 0D point, which is two different questions. So what we want is to replace the linear quantum jump from 0 to 1 with a jump from the center to the surface. Now, the way we conventionally say that, which is a bit misleading, so you have to be cautious, but it's a jump in all directions at once. That can be much better stated, much more logically and precisely. It's a single jump in circular space. And it's only by reverting to your linear point of view that you say it's in all directions. No, it's not in all directions. It's in all linear directions. It's only one direction in circular space. Now, I'm going to show you something, and this is the main purpose of showing you this transformation, which is a simple geometric and mathematic transformation on an irrational constant. Irrationality we must have nothing to do with, because it can be proved that in linear geometry the unit of distance is 1. It just depends on how big you think that 1 is, but it is defined as the jump from the center of the line to its first distance. That should be said its first measurable distance. This goes to the measurement problem of quantum mechanics. Is what is that distance if there's nothing smaller? That's quite a paradox. We're on our way to solving it by integrating it. But it does lead to the same paradox, because you have, in order to have computable space in a geometry, you have to have a computable index. The computable index of linear space is 1, because that's our conventional name for what is now called the Planck length, which is quite difficult to define. First of all, it's incredibly small. It's about 10 to the negative 34th power. But one aspect of that paradox which you should be aware of, this is kind of an interjection, but I'm not trying to get off course, but it's important for you to see that if there is indeed a Planck unit of distance, then Albert Einstein proved that there must be a Planck length for time. That has actually been computed using I'll just say a mathematical system. It's 10 to the negative 44th power, which these numbers are ginormous, okay? And they're ginormously small. So the Planck time is approximately, well, it doesn't really make much difference what the decimal coefficient is, 1 through 9, because the magnitude is so extreme. But it is part of Zeno's paradox, and it is part of the quantum theoretic approach that there must be a quantum of everything. We already know that from the line, or we wouldn't have numbers, we wouldn't have distance. So we know there's such a thing as computable linear distance. Is there such a thing as computable linear time? According to a theoretic model, there is, and it's 10 orders of decimal magnitude smaller, but you have to know what the units are. So this would be a fraction of time, conceived as a linearizable quantity. Well, another thing that Einstein proved is that space and time are related linearly. He proved that that's true, and it's true on a derivative. It's the derivative of time from energy, and it's the derivative of linearized space from spherical space. Now, what we're going to do is integrate that so we can get a one-component number for spacetime. And the way this was discovered, essentially by Max Planck, and then I needed to interpret what Max Planck discovered, but with this new geometry I was able to do so. We now are capable of relating space and time in one number. Now that is thought to be light speed, which would be the index of spacetime. Light speed is the index of space-time. But space-time is a two-component relational system. Light speed is a two-component relational expression. So it's an expression of a system in two-component space. That is not linear. What we're going to do now is compose the two-component space, but you have to capture linearity, because you have to be able to transform the spherical numbers. First to make your expression for your equation, and then in the result you'll have a two-component number. You need to extract the linear numbers to prove that the two-component number is computable. It's an interesting split, and you'll notice there's a split. It's the split from one component number system to the two-component number system. Here's how to do it. First, we need the identity number for circular space. We have the identity number for linear space. It's the additive number 0, which also is reflected in subtraction, that 0 anywhere in the equation has no effect on the quantities. So 0 is a absence of quantity, and therefore it does not affect distance. All right, so that's the identity number of additive space as we were taught in school. We were also taught that there's a multiplicative identity, and just the way I phrased it, you would have to assume there must be a multiplicative space. You're about to discover it, and this is not in any textbook or any classroom, that the two-componency system that the universe uses is in fact circular space. A remarkable oversight. But that will lead to the solution to all of these paradoxes at its mathematical basis, is that we must switch to the integral number system. Just volumetrically, the increase in precision is sixfold. But that's actually not the most important aspect. That's a linear point of view that I'm showing you. The true significance is the interdimensional constant that regulates how to extract or compose circular numbers from linear numbers or linear numbers from circular numbers. The linear numbers are based on a quantum jump on a line. The circular numbers are based on a quantum jump in circular space, which is planar. So we're not squaring the space. What are we doing? We're tauing the space. We're tauing the space. In order to get the identity number of the number system, that would be 1, we can prove now that that number 1 is a circle, and it is the quantum circle. In other words, it's the smallest circle. So now we want to derive the Planck length in these units, which must be a linear number. That will be the radius of the circle whose value is 1. So it's going to be a fraction of 1. It'll be about 1/6. And if you divide 1 by 6, the linear number that is reducible from 1/6 to its linear representation is a decimal fraction of about 0.16, because 6 times 16 is 96. But you're not quite there, but you're close. So on a whole number ratio, it's about 6 to 1. We want to be more precise than that. We can compute the number tau and then take its inverse. So tau, written as a two-component number, is 6.28. That's 2 more decimals of precision. It is an irrational number, so it's an arbitrary cutoff point for the precision. But this is forced in linear mathematics, and calculus helps us do that, but it doesn't actually solve the problem geometrically. So we can't get rid of the irrational number in linear space. That fact will become critical in a moment, because we're going to solve that ancient problem. We're going to solve several ancient problems now, and this will lead us to the solution of the entire quantum paradox system. So this is the mathematical basis of the transformation to the new number system that solves the quantum paradox. All right, we need to show that at three levels: mathematical, geometric, which is the transformer, and in physical reality using measurements. So we do have to rely on measurements that have already been made. But in geometry, you actually don't do that. Once you're done with your geometric solution, then you prove it with the mathematics. So you do have to be able to visualize the mathematics first in order to achieve your geometry. We don't have a circular geometry, which means we cannot compose a spherical geometry. That's what's missing. That's what I discovered. So to get to spherical geometry, we begin with circular geometry because it's planarized sphericity. And there's a known fixed constant relationship between a circle and its sphere. You notice I said possessive. A circle and its sphere. The circle is the eigen of the sphere, and every sphere in the universe at all scales has an eigen, which means there is one and only one circle that is associated with any sphere, and the sphere defines the circle, and the circle defines the sphere. Now, you can see there's a little loophole there. The circle defines the sphere, but the sphere defines what's called a fibration of circles, which is an infinity of circles, because you can orient the circle randomly on the sphere. But no sphere in the universe is like that, and therefore no circle in the universe is like that. It's not random, because there's always angular momentum attached to a sphere. A sphere is actually the manifestation of angular momentum. That becomes peculiar when you look at gravity, which is spherical, but there does not seem to be angular momentum. There is no way to see the angular momentum of gravity in linear space. Actually, it's a physiological hindrance. I'll show you how to see beyond what your body is capable of. It's the true probe into imaginary space. I'm going to show you what imaginary space is. And it's not fantastical. That's demoting its position to, oh, it's imaginary, well, then it's not real. No, you go the other way. Because we cannot see it, and yet it is there, it must be superspace. All right? It's an integral that goes beyond our capacity to see with our onboard perceptual system. I'll show you how to turn that on. And when it does, the result is somewhat unpredictable. There is a tiny chance, many say, that you could lose your mind. I say that you don't want to say lose your mind, because that sounds like you can't get back. You have to suspend your mind and then try to turn on another part of your mind in its place. That is almost a clinical definition of psychosis, but it doesn't last long. But it is I do need to warn you. I got such a tremendous... I've gotten many of these jolts throughout my career in science, which does extend to scriptural science, but I don't expect you to credit that because of your educational system prevents you from crediting that. So what we want here is a circle with the inverse of tau as the radius, correct? That would be about 0.16. We're going to use the number 0.159 because that's one decimal of accuracy closer. But it is irrational, so we can't make it precise. I'll show you how to correct for that. There is a way to do that, and this machine we're about to use over here will help us do that. So we need to mathematically justify why we're using the inverse of tau, 0.159, on the radius. What is the mathematical justification for that? The relationship between the circumference of a circle and its radius, I believe, is 2 pi r. Well, you know what 2 pi is. It's tau, and that's the name we're going to use for 2 pi. I hope that does not confuse you. Science will forever pretend to be so confused by that that it just simply will not accept that. But you and I are strict logicians. And 2 pi has a factor of 2. We don't want that. We want everything unitized. And that number is tau, 6.28. All right? So, why do I say that the inverse of tau, which would be 0.16 or 0.159, depending on your precision scale, why is that true? It's because of the relationship of tau r equals c. Well, what we want is r, but not in terms of tau. We want r in terms of the number 1. Okay? That's what we want on the radius. And here's how you can see that. I won't draw the mathematical equation. Do it in your mind. Here's the equation we start with, which is known. Tau r equals c. All right? There are no numbers. It's just tau r equals c. Now, because the first term, that is the term on the left, is tau r, you can take one of the factors and make it a divisor on the other side. So now we have r equals c over tau. We know the number for tau. It's 6.28. We're just going to say that. And so r equals 1 over tau. And that's 0.16. So that's the validation, the mathematical transformer. It's a transforming function. It's a relationship. All right. So now we can do the same thing and click on this tool up here for circles. And we want center and radius, don't we? So let's select that. And when I click on the center point, I'm using a different tool than before. It's going to produce a box and ask me for the radius. Click. The radius, 0.159. Okay, and there's our circle. Now you use scroll, and I'm going to scroll up to make it smaller. And now I'm going to go the correct way and scroll down and then click drag to, oh, it still thinks I want to make a circle. I forgot. So what I'm going to do now without releasing my finger is press escape. It did make the point, but I don't want to click on it. Oh, actually I can. So I'm going to right click on that, delete. Now I'm going to do it right. Now up here you'll see that this is selected up here in the corner. Before it was selected here. Because I didn't remove the selection and it thought I wanted to draw another circle. So if I go out here right now and select the center point again, it would think I want to make a circle, which I've already made. So instead of doing anything on the screen, click on this tool, and now you can click and drag to recenter this. We simply want to increase the resolution. So we have, and now you can see, I'm not sure you can see those tiny numbers. I actually could make them bigger. And I'm learning as we go as well. But we now want to prove that this circle has a circumference of 1. And it should be very, very close to 1. Now here I'm changing the style to have a line thickness a little more, and the color will be a shade of blue. And I think you can see that pretty well. Let's make that a little darker. So that's our blue circumference. And now I'm going to close it with this little X up here. And now we have a slightly easier to see circle. Now what we want to do is compute the circumference. And the Greeks gave up on this because it can't be done. But you can get very, very close using modern algebra. So I'm going to click on the circle tool, which down here we have circular arc and circumcircular arc. I'm going to select this one, semicircle. And now it says select two endpoints. I'm going to select this one and this one. And now we should have a value close to 1/2. Over here, we have the semicircle. I'm going to turn it off, turn it on. I'm trying to highlight this. There. I think you can see that semicircle is highlighted. The number at the bottom is 0.4995. So we're very close. We're going to accept that for now. I could show you the method of making this virtually precise. But that's pretty close. 0.4995. There's a way of computing the accuracy, but I won't go into that now because this is not really a mathematics class. But you can see this gets down to basic mathematics. So the entire circle now is 1. Because the radius is the reciprocal of tau. That's a reciprocal number. So the value of the circle, we will now say, is 1 proportion 1. That's the proportion of the vertical aspect to the horizontal aspect. And the proportion is equal. So this is a depiction of E in a certain context. It's the continuous rate of change in square planar space. And that creates circular space. And the identity number for circular space is 1. That is the circumference of this circle. And therefore, 1 is the center of the two-component reciprocal number system. What that means is, on any reciprocal relationship between two proportional quantities, you have a two-component number, the components of which multiply to 1. So the smallest such number will contain the number 1, but we need the other number, because it's going to be 1 over n. I should start the other way. In the two-component number, written just like a complex number, except there is no imaginarity. It's a two-component number that you must conjugate to get the two linear numbers out. So that's a mouthful. I hope you're following this, but this is an interesting step that nobody ever thought to take, is to unitize the circle. The unit circle is somewhat misnamed. It's the linearly unitized surface. The circle is a surface. A line is not a surface. And so the circle can support what is called intrinsic geometry, which is not a grid. The linear number system, in its systematic development into 2, 3, and 4D, is a grid. Obviously, it's squared, cubed, and hypercubed space. And it has to be space, not space-time. In order to have space-time, you would have to at least begin at circular space. Well, there's a pretty profound and sound reason for that. It is the relationship between two quantities, which we're attempting to linearize. The actual relationship is on the surface because the surface is two-componency space. What we're going to prove now is the entire plane is two-componency space with its own number system. Well, that means that we're going to have to make a circular quantum jump. And we're going to need two of them. One for the linear quantum jump to the surface, from the center to the surface. That's 0.16 here. And you can see that. It's very close. It escape. Okay. You can see that. I'm just going to dial this in. And you can see it's very close to 0.16. Well, now I'm going to show you a trick. If I can, I'm not sure I can do this. I'm going to try to drag that. No, it doesn't drag. What I want to do is drag one of the points that defines the surface. And it's not there. It's this one. So let's go up here to B, because it's the same in the vertical and the horizontal aspects, as you know. So you can see it's really, that does look like 0.1585. Well, we want it to be 0.16. Let's see if we can just move it. Does it move? I didn't make it movable. So let's do something now. I can't do this. All right, we're going to have to accept that for now. It's not exact. It should be closer to 0.16. If we drill in a little farther, you can actually see this. This is the linearized. You see it curves off here, but it doesn't. If you go further, it almost straightens out. That's an asymptotic relationship. So it's at exactly 0.159, but the actual value is a little bit above that. It's 0.159, see that's 0.1590. The actual value is greater than that, but not much. So it's somewhere in here. So that's pretty good. That's pretty close. And we do have imaginations. Now in geometry you actually can't fudge. So this is an imperfect visual representation. But geometrically you can see that it's extremely close. And we could make it precise. With a footnote, because an irrational number in a relationship destroys the relationship. Now, that's actually a serious problem that I need to address, because there's a certain number of miracles involved in this actually working at all, which is one reason why nobody saw it. It's because it doesn't look like it's possible to do, partially for the irrationality, which must be rationalized. It doesn't translate to linear numbers. So irrationality is part of the linear system. Is it part of the circular system? I'll show you that it's not. And the way to do that is to put the irrational number off the circle, which is tau. On the unit circle, you have an irrational circumference. Well, we want the circumference to be rational. And therefore, all we needed to do was put the irrational component onto the radius. That's what we did. By making the circumference the unit of the space, it transfers the irrational number in the relationship to where it belongs, on the line, which is infinitely dense with irrational numbers. But the circle has no irrational numbers anywhere, because the surface itself is the center of the system. Okay, and we know that this is two-componency space, meaning there are two quantities. Okay. But instead of those two quantities being the vertical radius and the horizontal radius, requiring the Pythagorean theorem even to solve, what we want is that relationship between the vertical aspect and the horizontal aspect to be transferred from its extrinsicality, requiring two linear numbers, to intrinsicality on the surface, which is a two-component number embodying the aspects. Now, that cannot be done directly, but it can be done indirectly by observing, first of all, is there any space to a line? No, unless you say that it has a 1D representative, but it's obviously a derivative of space. Well, so is 2D. That's also a derivative of space. 3D seems to catch up with space and overtake it, because now you've cubified space, which makes 8 vertices in space at the edge. That's a solid figure, but it's squared, cubed, and then hypercubed in space-time. What we want to do is go back to the drawing board and realize that we're looking at spherical space, which is here linearized, I'll just put it that way, to a plane. So you're looking at the eigen of the sphere, which is a value of motion called angular momentum. A moment's thought will convince you of that. Every sphere has an eigen of rotation. No sphere is static. Unless, we'll come back to that, because the proton does not seem to have spin. Although you may know that there are formulations showing that the proton does have angular momentum. That's what spin would be. But spin in the quantum world is actually more of an orientation of the eigen, because spin can be unitized to various orthogonal eigens. And this is where we get some very interesting experiments done on electrons, which can be eigenized, that is polarized. And the Stern-Gerlach experiment shows that electrons can be magnetically oriented. That is to orient the eigen. And it's remarkable that it can be polarized. And that's a linear term. Now, the eigen is a prefix that's used in a lot of contexts. And if you're really into quantum mechanics, you may know about the eigenaxis, and there are several other eigens. What an eigen means is that in a certain space, there is one preferred something. For instance, if you have a static sphere, it has no orientation. But the moment you apply angular momentum, it creates 2 eigens. One is the eigenaxis because it's the part of the sphere that does not rotate. A true linear line is the eigenaxis of a rotating sphere. But it also produces, as well as a 1D eigen, it produces a 2D eigen called the equator. It's the equator of rotation. It's the eigen of the sphere with respect to motion. I'm learning something as I'm giving this lecture. I'm actually getting a little emotional. I hope you appreciate the depth and profundity of what I'm expressing to you. It impresses me every time. All right. So what we want to observe here is that we're looking down on a rotating sphere. And that circle that you see is the eigen of angular momentum. Is it spatial? You can see that it is. But here's where it gets interesting. It's not linearly spatial. All right. What is it then? It's circularly spatial. Okay. Now here is the critical insight that just breaks the mind if you don't. You're going to have to flicker between 2 points of view as I tell you what you're looking at. Okay, you accept that it's a closed line because it has no open-endedness as a linear line does. But this is a line. It's just not a linear line. It's a closed line. What does that mean? Let me ask you something. Does a line have an inside? Euclid said no, and science has agreed ever since. So the line has no inside. Well, that means it has no outside. That's tautological. So it's not a surface because it has no inside. That's the definition of a surface. Now, does the closed line have an inside? Okay, I think you're starting to get a glimpse. We haven't gotten to the critical jump point yet. But I'm preparing you for it so you won't have to flicker very long. And this is when you step outside of the box and you're in danger of losing. Sorry, let me have a sip of coffee here. Oh, come and taste and see that the Lord is good. If you're not laughing, you're not enjoying life as well as you should, my friend. All right, a little Joe there. I should pep up the old professor to stop laughing and get on with it. It's the most critical insight you're ever likely to see in your entire life. All right. So we have a closed line that has an interior. Yes. Yes, it does. Well, that's really profound that the circle has an inside. You know why? It has an outside. Now there is an outside. All right. That's the extent of circular space. It's circularized space. Well, you know already that the circle represents a sphere. Essentially, you're looking at a sphere. Right over here. But you're looking down on it, and the equator is the circle. So we're looking at the equator of a circle. Well, Marvy, well, you can see that if the sphere were to expand, let's just say, so would the circle. So we're going to expand the circle to get the quantum jump in circular space. But first we have to have some idea of why we're even doing this. Well, we want to begin here in this approach that I'm taking in this video presentation. We want to do it mathematically. Now, you can do it geometrically, and this is a marvelous tool. You can drag stuff, you can draw intersecting lines, spheres, circles. There is a 3D. If you click up here, you will see that there is, under perspectives, 3D graphics. Oh dear. Well, we're not going to click on it now. That'll be in a future lecture. We will be getting into spherical geometry very quickly, but you're already in it. This is actually the eigen of the sphere, which directly represents the sphere on a simple constant. It's actually a 2-to-1 relationship, and I'll show that to you. So what we want is to prove the foundational principle of inversive geometry, which you can learn from Zvezdelina Stankova on number file conducted by Brady. Oh, he's Matt Brady. Oh, I think this guy is beyond top notch. He's somehow got supervision. It's very hard to make a reasonable presentation when it's also an interview, because you have to know something about what the person is going to say, or you can't really interview them effectively. Well, Brady is unbelievable. You know how he solves that problem? He asks about one question every 5 or 10 minutes. And just lets the person give the presentation themselves. Well, she gives a marvelous presentation of inversive geometry. It's called Inversion on the Circle. And all it says is, anything you can draw inside the circle also exists outside the circle. We're going to use that to show an interesting mathematical relationship, which to the best of my knowledge, no one has ever understood. Inversive geometry is, I guess you could say, understood, but how does that pertain to our situation of unitizing the circumference of the eigencircle? We want to unitize the eigencircle so that it becomes the basis of a new metric in real space, physical space. That's spherical space. That's what we discovered in the 20th century. Everything is in spherical space. The atom is, the proton, the electron. We know that the photon is a sphere. The Earth is a sphere. Why? The Sun is a sphere. Why? Galaxy clusters are spheres. Why? Gravity is spherical. Oh, man. That's a lot of sphericity for a little one-component number system to handle. Now, one of the things I'll be showing you is that the sphere also has an inside and outside, which means it too can be parameterized on a two-component number. Well, isn't that a direct contradiction? Think about that for a second. Assuming that the circle is a two-component number that has to do with the fact that one of the components is inside the circle and the other component of the number is outside the circle, can't you do exactly the same thing with the sphere? Of course you can. Well, that means you have two different versions of the two-component number system. I don't want to show you how that conversion works, but it is a second mind-blowing identity. These are identities, okay? These are mathematical identities. Nothing is more certain than mathematical identities. All right. So you can see that there's an inside, which we're saying has half of the numbers. Because in a two-componency number system, you have exactly two halves. Two halves, they're two columns. In one column is the first component, that's one number. And in the second column is the second number. In complexity, the first component is called real, and the second component is called imaginary. In our system, the first component is inside the circle, and the second component is outside the circle, and that's their relationship. The relationship between real and imaginary component numbers, is solved with a conjugate algebra, which is simply cross multiplication because you have to get rid of I to get the linear numbers out. In our system, I'll show you how to get the linear numbers out, but I think you'll have a very good chance of seeing it yourself. That's the reason the synthetic phase of science is so exciting is because this is when you solve the relational problems so you can see. True understanding is visual. And blind people have this. They just can't use their eyes to verify it, but they still use the machinery. So I always like to mention that. I get so emotional sometimes because I've seen blind people ride bicycles. And I was blind at one time, virtually with cataracts, and I wasn't riding my bicycle as well as a blind person it was. At scale, I mean, you'd have to say that's a pretty good trick. They click with their tongues. To use sonar like dolphins. Fucking unbelievable. Anyway, I'm going to give you something way more powerful than that. That just enables you to ride a bicycle. This enables you to see and understand the universe the way the universe expects you to see and understand it. That is the goal of science. All right, so this is the gateway. All right, what do we have here? We have an inside and an outside. We're saying one of the components of the two-component number system is inside. Well, it would be less than 1. Oh, very good. Therefore, outside, the other component is greater than 1. All right, you may know that I've mentioned several times John Horton Conway's discovery of the surreal binary number tree substantiates all this in a way that's worth knowing. Even John didn't fully see what he had discovered, same as Max Planck did not fully understand what he had discovered. This will show you what Max Planck actually discovered and what John Horton Conway actually discovered, for which he deserved a Nobel Prize. So yeah, we don't want to go to that side. That's a sordid, morbid aspect of modern science. It's just so blind that it's a new dimensionality of blindness. I will show you the reciprocal of that to get you out of the trap. So we have one number inside, one number outside. One number is less than one number is greater than 1. In order for that to be consistent on the identity of the number space, they have to multiply to 1. In linear space, the numbers add to 0. That balances the entire line to infinity and beyond. I had to add beyond, because that's what Buzz Lightyear would say, Daddy-O. Okay. Oh, this is good coffee. It's not spiked, but I get high on water. I don't actually... But I'm weak. I like substances. I have snuff under my gums right now, but it's in pouches. This is a major discovery in my small world. This coffee, I actually used to roast and grind my own beans. If you have never roasted and ground your own beans, you've never tasted fucking coffee. But I still drink this mud because I'm it comes from my environmental upbringing. All we drink is burnt, stale beans. And I like it, probably because my biofeedback system keeps saying, more, more, it's that time of day again. Well, I've also had a hit of marijuana. So I'm flying on 3 drugs, not to mention the 3 prescription drugs, one of which I've run out of because I'm so poor. But I'm still alive for a while, so you better pay attention. But at least I'm not dripping brown sludge. I used to have Flex would appear. Here's a dribble line. Oh, yeah, about once every 5 minutes I lean over, and then I have to edit out every time I lean over to spit. Like a goddamn swamp creature. But I'm a happy-go-lucky redneck. I finally realized I'm a redneck. Okay, let's get going here. Not in the negative sense. A redneck is just someone who's been burnt by the sun on his poor, hapless neck. Yeah, it makes you ornery. Of course, you got a sunburn. Your neck is always... Well, you tend to be ornery. But, when the sun goes down and the moon comes out, glory, how we're gonna shout. That's a real redneck. He's a dancer. He's getting out there. He'll fall down. He's not ashamed to let you see him. Like me. Medicine. All right. The downside of your professor. Hey, we're human. I'm not ashamed. I told you. I'm getting ready to go to the next level. If I need something beaten out of me, you don't need to worry. It's going to happen. I'm not looking forward to that, but come on. Am I ready for heaven? Do I look like... Well, you... Peter at the pearly gates? What's that under your... Is that tobacco? Whatever happens after that. Well, I don't know, but I believe in the mercy and kindness and compassion of the Lord, but I'm not going to tempt him. Well, these shitty things. I'm starting to feel a little repentant and ashamed now. All right, at least I have a double Windsor knot tie, which, by the way, you notice I don't know if you noticed. Pardon me. That's coffee burp. Tasty burp. God, I love... Oh, there's our train that goes by like 50 times day and night, blaring 150 decibel horn as it goes through just 4 blocks away. You've heard the helicopters, the low-flying planes, you hear a siren, there's all kinds of stuff going on. All of which is high decibel, distracting. I don't know what's wrong with my hairline. I never used that. Okay, that got rid of it. It's like I have a reverse widow's peak. All right, this is called a comb over, I believe. And my hair is falling out in the back. As long as I can't see it, I don't care what's happening back here. Yeah, anything back here, I don't look anymore. Oh boy, this is strong coffee, man. All right. So we have a number that's less than 1 and a number that's greater than 1. that are on either side of the surface and multiply to the surface. That's called the two-component parameterization of the circle, with a parameterization that nobody in the history of science has ever thought of, even though we know about inversive geometry. Just nobody ever realized if everything inside the circle is represented outside the circle, couldn't we justify that mathematically? Well, I just did. It's called the multiplicative number space. And as you know, multiply has a paired operator. There's plus minus for the line. Well, there's multiplication and division for the circle because it's two-component space. That's what we're proving. All right, so now let's see the number system. Everybody these days, against their will if necessary, is forced to consider if it's not mathematical, but we don't care. Well, it's that form of ossification, just a refusal to see geometry, that's one of the reasons that we have such a maniacal, psychotic physics department on Earth today. Just harebrained theories. Harebrained. Well, that's not the reputation science should have. I mean, anyhow, if we have a linear quantum jump from 0 to 1, which is the radius of this is the Planck length, this is the quantum, excuse me, this is the quantum circle. Because the radius is the smallest linear jump. That's called the quantum jump. But you can see that there are two aspects to the quantum jump. In 2022, I proved, using rigorous mathematics, it is Euclidean logic that I used, to prove that a line, any line, like the line here, that line, that is embedded in spherical space. That is a calculus relationship, by the way. But the circle is not embedded in a grid. That's how we're doing it now in physics. It's the other way around. The grid is actually embedded in the circle. The aspect ratio is 6 to 1. Okay, now you know that. That's magnificent. That means that the Planck unit for linear distance separation, the Planck length, 10 to the negative 34th power distance on a line, has nothing less. That means that's imaginary space. It may mean something else, but you can't see what else it might mean because you only have one componency. You're only measuring distance. On the circle, you're measuring a ratio between two distance quantities, but we're going to see that one of the quantities is not spatial. You might guess that it's temporal, and therefore we're looking at the quantum of space-time. If you guessed that, you're a genius. But I can prove it. You are looking at the quantum of space-time. That's not all it might be. It's actually something far more profound than that. It's more profound than Einstein relativity because it actually gets the answer. Einstein did not get the answer. He got the relationship between linearized space, that's that grid, and another orthogonal component, which turns out to be linearized time. And even that is not quite stated correctly. It's the orthogonality between 3D space, which is cubic space, turning it into hypercubic space, which has an imaginary dimension because it's between all the three lines. In the same sense that Z is in between X and Y, X is between Z and Y is between Z and X. The same thing pertains in space-time, which is a 4D composition. Don't ever forget that. It's a 3-1 composition. Well, you know it's wrong. because you're trying to relate an orthogonal imaginary one componency to a triply orthogonal grid extrinsic geometry overlaid on spherical space. We're going to integrate that. And the integral will be about 6 times more powerful from a certain very specific linear aspect. But it's got to be better. It's got to be more accurate. That's just the beginning of the insight. So, we have the quantum jump from 0 to 1. That's the linear spatial quantum jump. Is from 0 to 1 because there's nothing in between 0 and 1. Right? Right? Not quite. There's something there, or there wouldn't be a jump at all. What there's not is a number for it. That indicates an imaginary number space. In linear space, there has to be. Well, Einstein added it when he added time. So it's imaginary time. But time is already a linear quantity in the universe. I proved that, so you can accept that. Time is linear. Well, we know that because it only goes in one direction. Direction in what? All right. What we want now is to simply emulate Euclidean numeric construction. So the next step is going to be Euclidean in logic form. Instead of the jump from 0 to 1 on a line, which is the radius of this circle, is the linear quantum jump. That's embedded in a higher space, as I proved. So what is the circular quantum jump? There are two that are locked into one number. There are two quantum jumps that you could say are simultaneous, but that underscores the paradox. Simultaneity is not considered a spatial concept. There is no such thing as simultaneity in space. Okay, I want you to think about that a lot, and don't talk back to me. If you have a question, you put it in the comments so that I can answer you. This is the time to ask questions. I should be at Madison Square Gardens. I should be at Harvard or Yale or Stanford or Cambridge or Oxford or Göttingen or Milan or Dubrovnik or Moscow. It doesn't make any difference, but I should be lecturing somewhere. You see why? This is the imperative of science. This is not me being megalomaniac, although it may sound like it. Well, that's the coffee kicking in. All right. All right. So we have the linear quantum jump. What would be the spherical quantum jump? Well, it has to be from the Archimedean center. On the line, that's from 0 to 1. On the circle, it begins at 1 and goes in two directions simultaneously. Just accept that for now. Some kind of new definition of simultaneity that's not relativistic, because there's no such thing as simultaneity. For the same reason, there's no such thing as co-spatiality. You can't have something at the same position in space. The Pauli exclusion principle forbids it. So you can't have simultaneity in space, that is spatial. You can't have spatial co-position in space. For the same reason, you can't have simultaneity in time. Everywhere where there's time, it's unique, just as in space. Otherwise, they wouldn't correlate at all. Right? I think you're starting to see some real subterranean stuff going on here. So let's make sure we rationalize all this, so none of this is spooky. We haven't even gotten to the spooky part. But we do need a sound mathematical basis for our new geometry. What is the circular quantum jump? It's not from a point. You're looking at the circular point. What is peculiar is this point has an interior. That does not make sense to us. Well, if it has an interior, it must be spatial. Not necessarily. Let's axiomatize our doubt. Let us assume that space is only outside the circle. Well, then you would probably want to answer the question, then what is inside the circle? We're going to give it a placeholder name just so we can refer to the inside of the circle, because now we're axiomatically stating that what is outside the circle is space, to the same proportion that space goes out on a line. Here, space is going out on a circle. But there has to be a smallest circle. That is not a point. It's the Archimedean balance of the system, which has to be an object, and it has to be equivalent to the point. Well, the point has no equivalency because it's a derivative. The center of this circle is a derivative of the circle, to the same proportion that 0 on the line is a derivative of every number, because it's the frame of reference for every counting number. That means every number, because when you unitize the number line, it's entirely counting numbers with nothing in between them. And this goes down to the paradox of quantization of continuity. But what you're looking at here is a continuous line. So if it can be parameterized, it must be on the inside and outside in order to generate the surface from two numbers, one of which is inside, one of which is outside. This is the mathematical basis of inversive geometry, which is so profound that I strongly recommend you watch the two videos produced by Matt Brady on his YouTube channel Numberphile, where he interviews and allows to give the entire presentation, which is what he does. Magnificent technique. You want to give the scientist scope. A mano-a-mano interview such as Kurt Jaimungal engages in is ineffective for this level of science. You need to let the scientist talk on their, as if the interviewer weren't even there. So that's what Matt Brady does. And so Zvizdalina gives you, you will not regret watching that video, and you might want to watch the second one. You might also fall in love with Zvizdalina, but she's married, so be careful. All right. She's from Bulgaria. Oh, yeah, she's Slavic. Oh, boy. I married a Slavic lady. She died of cancer, so that made me sad. But then I turned to science, and now I'm okay again, because heaven overrules the petty foibles of men, including cancer. All right. So what's the quantum jump in circular space? Well, it has to be from 1. Well, what's the next number? Ha! It's 2. Well, Max Planck proved that that is actually the correct lowest number for two-component space, although he didn't see that. I did. So there are two numbers that split from 1, because 1 is two numbers. It's 1 proportion 1, because that's the proportionality of the vertical aspect, which is linear, and the horizontal aspect, which is linear. If you can perfectly compose that, you get 1 proportion 1. That is the value of this surface. That is the number 1 for the circumference, where the radius is an irrational, unreal number. 0.159, as we composed this circle here, has a radius of 0.159. That is not a circular number. First of all, it's a one-component number. Second of all, it's irrational. And third of all, it's less than 1. Less than 1 makes it a candidate but the other two, it's not a circular number. It's a circular component number, such that on the Pythagorean theorem, if you use the right mathematics, you can make 0.159 vertical and 0.159 horizontal turn into unitization of the circle. And that has to do with tau and the inverse of tau. But we already went through that. I'm just reminding you, this is all transparently obvious so far. So instead of 0 being the center of 1, 2, 3, or 4D, we now have the circle at the center of two-component space, where one of the components is less than 1 and has to be composed of the numbers 1 and 2, and the number outside, which represents another circle. Both of these represent another circle, because we're composing the circular quantum jump instead of the linear quantum jump, which is on the radius. So the circular quantum jump has to be split in two opposite directions. We're going to say opposite until we define what that means. But if you look at the line, the same thing happens. If the line were composed in two componency space, the first number would be 1, -1, wouldn't it? Of course it would. Why? Because they add to 0. And then when you get to plus infinity and minus infinity, you add them, and they add to the Archimedean center. So remarkably simple. Why didn't they teach it to us this way in school? Because mankind is not as smart as Great Uncle Sam here. And that is my name and title from now on, because I am getting megalomaniac. But I'm not going to be invading Sicily with my fleet of tuna boats tomorrow, you know what I mean? Because I'll keep drinking coffee, and I'll probably have some more beer to the detriment of my liver and kidneys and heart, and probably my brain eventually, but not yet. As long as I have a brain, I'm going to give you the secrets of the universe. So we're getting down to it, and you can tell I'm getting excited. It may be time for one of my favorite God-given drugs. And this is for you children. Don't do this until you know how to use a lighter, because I've burned myself so many times. I much prefer matches, but I'm in the space age, so I pretend like I'm with NASA and smoke out of a pipe with this space age device that got us to the moon, if you know what you're talking about. God, it started affecting me even before I had totally inhaled. All right, let me just have a quick bite. I should probably put this on pause, but I'm just shameless when I'm this excited. Oh, it's gotten me in trouble. I don't regret a moment. Well, I wouldn't want it to be replayed in many cases, but oh well. Breakfast with a professor. I hope you're taking a break, because it's been 2 hours and 20 minutes and I'm not even... At least it's not snooze dribbling. And this is, in fact, a double Windsor nut. I'm giving the Tylen from my pituitary glands, or Tylen glands, I mean, a chance to dissolve the carbohydrates into simple sugars. That really happens. Oh, so it's miraculous. People who say they don't believe in a creator or a designer, I just don't have time for such people anymore. Really? Oh, you're an atheist? Dr. Richard Dawkins? Well, you're some kind of witch doctor then. Shouldn't be talking to children. No, I could get in trouble any second now. Just start gnashing my teeth. No. Totally stable, but you see, I'm not used to presenting myself. I'm a loner. I try to be alone, except when I meet the proper woman, in which case I'd never want to be alone again until she dies, and then you have to be alone again. That can be jarring. Why you need to keep eating. You need to... This could be it. We saw him die. Well, we'll give him a warning or a strike. He shouldn't have died. That's prejudicial to living people. Who does he think he is? All right. A little more coffee. Another drug. By the way, carbohydrates are drugs. Sugars are drugs. Everything that runs through your veins is a drug. Proteins are drugs. I believe oxygen is a drug. Water is a drug. Well, the illimitability of the spatial universe can also drug a man. Let's see if we can get a handle on that using something called rational logic. So we know that the jump is from 1 to 2, which means that defines our two reciprocal numbers. The number inside 1, 1 is 1, 2. And the number outside 1, 1 is 2, 1. I think you could teach that to a second grader. Don't you? I know I could. Doubt that anybody else could, though. Children trust me. Oh, they see I'm just pretty much the same level they are. Don't you agree? Oh, God. Well, so where are these numbers? Well, let's find out. Halfway to the center from the surface would be half of the inverse of tau, right? Well, we can just bisect the line segment. We can use this tool to do so. Up here, segment. But don't we want to bisect it? Let's see. What do we do to get the bisection? Perpendicular bisector. That might be it. Yeah, let's try perpendicular bisector. What is it? Select 2 points. Or one segment. Well, let's do that. Click on this, and now it's waiting. I click on the center, and I click on, oh, look what it's doing. And it's showing me what it's going to do, and I click there. Oops. Click there. Why is it not? Oh. Oh, shit. I'm not sure what's happening. Oh, look. I think, is that, no. I'm not sure what this thing is. Okay. I'm going to get out of this tool. I thought I knew what I was doing. Oh, I know. First of all, we need to make a segment. Select 2 points. Okay, segment. Now click on this. And it shows me you're doing the right thing. Click that. Right. Now that should have, yes, it down here. I'm going to highlight it. Down here, you see it says 0.159. So we want halfway, right? So we can represent 1, 2. Halfway will be 1, 2. You have to get the order right. It's 1 over 2. It's 1/2. Correct? Yeah. And then we'll be able to find 2 on the outside. Correct? Of course. So, how do we do it? Well, we click on this, and we want perpendicular bisector. Now it should work. Click on that. Now select this point, and oh man, I don't know. I'm not sure I understand how this works. Maybe you're supposed to, if I click on, oh, did that do it? Yeah, I think so. Oh, it thinks I want to do it again, so click up here. And I think that's a perpendicular bisector. What's half of 0.16? Should be about 0.8, right? Let's zoom in. Oh, look at that. So we got it. It shouldn't be exactly 0.08 because it's not exactly 0.16 for the radius. All right, so that is halfway. Well, now we can compose a circle. I'm sure I'm exuding enormous confidence to you. That's not it. Oh, here it is. So we want a circle with center through point, or we want circle with center and radius. Okay, we don't want that, so we want this one. So you click on the center, and then just drag the mouse until this intersects. Oh, it locked. I told you this is a frickin' intelligent program. You can turn that on and off, by the way. So click there. Now that should be a circle with half the radius. Does it look like it? Now up here I want to click on this so I don't make another circle. I'm going to click on this. Right click. I just inadvertently zoomed on it. Settings. Style. Thickness a little more. And color, we'll just make it orange. Maybe a little darker there. Alright. Then close this. And now we have two concentric circles. We want the other one on the outside. That's easy to compute. It will be at double the distance from A to D. Now what we can do now is simply take this line segment, which I will click on, and go to settings. Segment AD. Oh, okay. Sorry. I could always edit this later. What we want is to compose this radius to twice its length, correct? I don't know of a way to just copy the line segment and move it. So for now, just to save time, I'm sorry, this will be refined certainly in the future. About the double of 0.15, that is 0.16, would be 0.32. So we're just going to select that as a point. And to do that, we select the point tool, point, intersect. What is this? Midpoint or center, attach, detach, point, attach or detach point. There's a lot of this I don't understand yet. It's so powerful, it's just mouth-watering. So I'm going to make a point at 0.32, and then remember to come back up here and turn off my tool. I'm going to zoom to see if it did snap. I don't know if it would snap here. I doubt it. No, it did not. So let's adjust that. This should be a movable point. It is, so now we have it on 0.32, which is not exactly accurate, but it's pretty good. For visual purposes, it's certainly accurate since we don't have that kind of discriminatory vision to make those kind of minute adjustments. So now we want to make another circle. We'll use the circle tool. Circle with center through point, that is what we want. Get the center and this point, which it snapped. Okay, now that may look like an atomic system. There is a very good reason for that, but we're not there yet. First we need to get, I need to turn off my tool. Good thing I remembered. And click it again. Okay, so now we just want to have a little more space. And over here I'm just going to give us a tiny bit more space. If I can remember how to do this, I'm not sure that's doing it. I think this is the maximum amount of space, but we want to increase the resolution. I'll just adjust the camera a little bit. And now we can recenter this by clicking and dragging, and now expand this. And now I think you have a pretty good idea of, first of all, this inside circle, which is in Auburn. That has a radius of 1/2 of the radius. This circle is the center with a value of 1. This is a circle with a value of 1, 2. This circle has a value of 2, 1. What we want to prove is that those two circles are harmonic on the center circle. This is the inner circle, making one of the two component linear numbers, although it's linearizable. It's 1, 2. 1, 2 is how we'll say it, but you could say it several ways. It's 1 proportion 2 with a colon. It's 1 over 2, and that is called a fraction, and it's also known as division, but the correct nomenclatural representation of that relationship is they're proportional. And if you invert the proportionality, it inverts what's inside the circle to what's outside the circle, which are two circles that therefore represent the center. And these two component numbers, this circle is a number, this circle is a number, and in combination they represent another number, which is, all three of them are two component numbers. But this one contributes to the two componency, this one contributes to the two componency. In one componency space, that is addition to 0. In two componency space, it is multiplication to the center. Now, the paradoxical nature of the center here is that it's a surface, which means it has an inside and an outside. And now we've just been able to compose the two numbers that represent that relationship in a closed, coherent, relatively continuous number system. And now I need to show you the quantum jump in circular space, which is a two-componency quantum jump, and therefore it's in two opposite directions. What I then will show you is that is a conjugal relationship instead of polaric. So you're not seeing polarity here. Polarity, but you're seeing the two componency equivalent of polarity, which gets into some new nomenclature, which does have a derivative representation in linear space. But remember, this is not Kansas anymore. This is two componency space. This is circular space. This is in-out space. It's not left-right space. It's not plus-minus space. It's not plus-minus space. But there is another relationship that is not polaric, where the two balanced numbers of the line add to 0 all the way to infinity, making essentially the value of the line 0. The circle has a value that is not 0 because it does not involve additive identification to the Archimedean of the object. Instead, the Archimedean of the space, there is space now. The Archimedean of the space is the circle, inside of which are numbers less than spatial reality. At the surface is the intersection of non-spatial space, which is inside, and spatial space, which is outside. And I don't believe I ever got around to telling you what is the placeholder term we're going to use for the space inside. Anti-space. And later I'll show you by anti we are incorrect. But anti-space is the simplest. But you can be more precise, and in fact you must be, because anti implies polarity. Anti means linearly opposite, although not strictly that's how it's used. This is not polarity, it's conjugality. Well, what's the difference? Well, this is 180-degree relation. This is 90-degree relation. This is 90-degree relation. So they're perpendicular. What's perpendicular? The inside and the outside are perpendicular. And I'll show you that that's not readily apparent, that the inside of the circle is not the opposite of the outside. It's the perpendicular aspect of the outside. The outside is space. So what does the circle represent? It represents the number for space, which is an ever-increasing number, 2, 4, 8, 16. That's a geometric progression, except that for now, because those are the representable numbers. The conjugate number that must accompany that jump, that is the circular jump, is from 1 to 2. It would have to be. And that makes the number 1, 2, 2, 1. It should be the other way around. That makes the frequency wavelength relationship. That is 2, 1, 1, 2. I hope you understand I'm using notational abbreviation. It's so simple, it can be stated this way. It's the number 1, 2. Okay? You could also say it's the number 2, 1. If you say it's the number 2, 1, you're talking about frequency. And the reciprocal of frequency is 1, 2. That's called wavelength, which is a form of length, but it's inaccurately named. So that's what Max Planck discovered, is the quantization of numeracy at the quantum scale. That the true quantum jump is not from 0 to 1. The true quantum jump is from 1, 1, 1, 1 to 2, 1, 1, 2. That can be abbreviated. It's the jump from 1, 1 to 1, 2. Both of those being split numbers on multiplication, and both of the components being anti-multiplicative. That's called division. That's an inaccurate word. You must not call that division. There's no such thing as division in the universe. Is there such a thing as multiplication? Yes, and therefore I'm wrong in saying there's no such thing as division. But when you see division in two-componency coherent rational space, it is proportion. And it's the proportion of what's inside to outside. That makes the surface value unity. And that represents the uni in universe. This is the geometric universe that has a quantum center that is imaginary and an exterior which is also imaginary. And so imaginary is the key word. That imaginarity, you have to, this is where you begin to change your mind, to see imaginarity. Because what we're looking at here, first of all, is the center of gravity, right? Which goes to a point. That's been proved. Why does it go to a point? What happens at that point? Well, since gravity is nothing more than a relationship between two quantities, when you get to the center where they're actually correlated, the quantum correlation of the two quantities is a rate. Well, a rate is a circle. But a circle confounds the bejeepers out of us because we can see it has an interior. You must train your mind to both see and not see the interior. And it depends on context, because it depends on which number system you're using. Because each number system represents a different geometry. You can see at a glance that the circular number system is so much more powerful than the linear number system that there is almost no comparison. Only circular space gives a view of reality. It was discovered in the 20th century, but nobody finalized it in the synthetic stage. I'm taking up the slack and finishing the progress of science from the 19th to the 20th century. What should have been realized in 1910 was only realized a century and a tenth later, and a fifth after that, on an irrational distance of time on a timeline. Because it was in 2022 that I figured this out. This is the answer. This solves everything in physics. You're seeing it geometrically. What I'm attempting to show you now is how it translates to physicality. And this is where it gets spooky, of course. Who can define reality? Well, let's take a shot at it, shall we? And we'll close this off before 3 hours. The circle that's inside one, we're saying, is in orthospace. That can be proved, and we're going to prove it now. So we're going to call it by the name that we think it's going to be, and then prove that that is its name. It's orthospace. This is a characteristic of space itself that not even Einstein saw. He saw that there had to be imaginarity, but he was trying to compute for gravity. That's monopolar, so he had quite a task doing that, but he solved it with hypercalculus. He got the interpretation of the Poincaré-Minkowski construct. So Einstein was the union of Poincaré's genius and Minkowski's genius, and Lorentz. Enrique Lorentz. So the circle outside of one is space. And now we have the quantum jump in space. It's a circular jump. It's a circular jump from 1 to 2. Correct? Not quite. This is circular space. Every one of these numbers is a circular number, so it's a proportional number on whole numbers beginning at 1, the next of which is 2. So this is the jump from 1-1 proportionality to 2-1 proportionality. And now you will want to ask, what are the units of this proportionality? What are the units of the component numbers of the component numbers? The component numbers of a circular number are two component numbers. The components of the components are linear counting numbers. They're one component distance metrics. But in this construct, one of them is not distance, because distance only exists outside of the 1-1. What's inside the 1-1 is orthodistance, and it would be measured as the distance in time if you're using time-space. That is remarkably naive. But in its naivete, it gives the governments the ability to travel into outer space. And we're not going to touch that. It's not humans who are in outer space. You might think so, you might say so, you might say, oh, I'm crazy. Yes, humans are part of the operation going on in outer space, but humans are not really part of what's going on. They're required in order to demonstrate certain aspects of space travel. But those human monkeys who go into outer space, every now and then a few of them don't come back. Because nature herself says, you must not even dream of leaving this atmosphere. And anyone who thinks we should is a government agent. That is tautological, darling. So there's a little... I used to be a pastor, so forgive me. So we have space. And here's the jump from the surface of space to the first spatial quantum. What is in between? I'll tell you what's in between. The same thing that's in between 0 and 1. And if that were true, we might as well throw up our hands because we'll never understand the universe. There has to be something in space to make space. Space cannot just be these circles. Why not? Because there's space in between the spaces. So it is continuous. But the jump from 1 to 2 is not continuous, isn't it? Think about that for a second. Have I stated all the facts yet? No. I've only given you one of the component numbers. That number never exists alone. And that shows a universal relationship. Because 2, 1 is not a complete number. If you're looking at physical space, and you want the translation between physicality and geometry, then you're going to have to make it work with the numbers. Otherwise, it's incomputable, and you must be wrong if it's incomputable. We know that because of microcircuitry logic, which is binary. I'm going to tell you something. It's not just binary unless you define binary very carefully. What I'm showing you is physical binary space. But what the computer cannot do, because it's using linear logic, is see dual binarity. It's dual binarity. Because one of the binary numbers is space, and the other binary number is orthospace. That's inside. And I need to show that to you now, but before I can show it to you, I need to develop the metric of circular space. We have no metric yet, although we can see it. There is no metric for the line either. Unless you accept 0 to 1. If you accept the jump from 0 to 1, which is from non-existence to unity, there is nothing in between. That's the quantum jump on the line. It's the jump from non-existence, which is 0, to unity, which is the quantum on the line. Now, in circular space, what we have, since it's a two-componency Archimedean, it's not non-existent. You're looking at it, but it's semi-non-existent. The circle is only existent in flat space. It's a circle. It's in flat space, but the universe is not in flat space, except in terms of motion. Accept that for now, but that is the antithesis to space, which goes by several names. Einstein said it was time. I say it's energy, but when I do say it's energy, therefore it's angular momentum. And that being the case, it's actually motion, which is the definition of force. That is, it's the axiomatic basis for the definition of force, which is construed as a one-component number in Newtonian space, because it's linear impact. There's no such thing. There is only spherical impact. And spherical impact is the intersection of two spheres on their mutual surface, and that it cannot be quantized. Bošković proved that. And he has the mathematic and geometric proof, which I proved that he proved. He could not prove it. I can. So, this does have a lot to do with a curve. Well, you're looking at a perfect curve. The circle is the curve. Every other curve, so-called, is a distortion of the circle. But what they all have in common is two-componency. Now, what we're looking at is a special case of a curve where it's closed. And that is the basis of angular momentum, energy, and time. But it is not the basis of space, except in contraspace. That's gravity. Gravity occurs in contraspace. Accept that for now, because it can be seen from one of two perspectives, where it's actually a force, and the contraforce would be a pseudo-force, which in that case would make light non-spatial. Space is only outside the unit. The unit is the intersection of contraspace and space. The question then is, how do you characterize contraspace? Well, first of all, how do you characterize space? Well, space, if it's conceived as a closed line system, as we're proposing now, then it's made of concentric circles. That describes the flight of the photon is on concentric circles. It also describes gravity, which is also on concentric circles. So this is the unification of gravity with electrodynamics. You're looking at it. It's the relationship between an inner circle in contraspace and an outer circle, which is spatial space. And the inner side of one is contraspace. And that can be proved in several ways. I hope you're a little bit baffled, but I hope you're far more satisfied than baffled at this point. But if you are baffled, you can line up behind every other mathematician and physicist who has ever existed. I am the only man who understands this. If you get it, you'll be the second man to see it. So the two numbers that compose the first counting number in real space is 1, 2. It's not 0, 1. That's the quantum linear jump. 1, 2 is the spherical quantum jump, which also looks mathematically exactly the same in circular space on the eigen of momentum. That will be the eigen of time-space intersection, but in order to see time-space intersection orthogonally, which Einstein proved you can do, you need to see orthogonality in circular space. And that will be the orthogonality of space with energy. And the eigen that has the value 1 is energy. Do you know why? Why is the eigen of the quantum circle 1? Do you know why? It's two quantities. But which two quantities? We know one of them is space. But here you have to switch from linearization space to sphericization space, which you're looking at. So the radial jump, which goes like this is a force line in circular space. It's a force line. You think of it, oh my God, that confuses the fuck out of me! Because only this is a line. Why do you keep saying line? Rotate it. Rotate the line. That's force. That's force. That's the only definition of force, is a rotating straight line. The only thing that matters, the only thing that can be measured, is the circumference. But something is happening inside. Because that radius goes all the way to the center. What is rotating? Is it time? Is it motion? What is it? Is it energy? Time? Motion? Angular momentum? What is it? Sine? Cosine? What is it? It's imaginary. That's the first thing. Well, it's imaginary, but it's not less than real. It's greater than real. You're looking into superspace. This is the embedding space of space. Because space has another dimension that we can't see. We interpret it as time, but it's actually energy. Because energy is a two-component number. There's a two-componency to the circle, which is energy. You know how energy is defined? How is energy defined? How is energy defined? Max Planck discovered it. What is it? It is called frequency times wavelength. Frequency times wavelength is energy. What is the linear number result of multiplying a frequency with a wavelength? It is the number 1. Do you know what physics knows about that number 1 now? That is unitized light speed. So you're looking at light speed. You're looking at space-time, although I'm getting to that. So the actual relationship that exists in orthocircular space This is inversive geometry. Inside and outside are perpendicular. Here's why. The force that is, you could conceive this as centrifugal force, the internal force that makes a photon, is a force that makes the surface that we call a photon. It's composed of two values. What two values? Well, light speed is linear distance over linear time. What you're actually looking at here is circular distance over circular time. But time is on the circle. Space is outside. Nothing is inside. We're getting to what's actually inside. But if it's orthogonal to the force line goes out from the center and stops at the surface. That's the limit of the centrifugal force that makes the circle from the inside. Well, the circle isn't just made from the inside. It's made from the union of centrifugal and centripetal force. Because that circle can only be there if there's a radial radius. That's a pressure called a force, called centrifugal force, which is unitary in circular space. So that's the value of the inside from one of the component aspects. It's the pressure that keeps the circle from disappearing into zero. That's the definition of a proton radius. Now for the electron radius, we go to the other side of the unitary surface. The unitary surface is held at its permanent position as the quantum of circular space by an internal pressure that's balanced with an external pressure called centripetal force. They are orthogonal. So to the proportion that 1:2 is centrifugal force from the inside, making the surface, why then doesn't it fly into infinity? Because of 1:2 acting from without. That's the pressure of gravitational space, gravitationalized space. The interior is centrifugalized space. The exterior is centripetalized space. Those are orthogonal. That's frequency times wavelength. So which is which? And there's nothing inside, because since they're orthogonal, when the exterior pressure reaches the surface, this is the interface between the two force fields, it goes sideways. At the infinitesimal, where the force line coming in, pressurizing the circle to zero, towards nothingness, it can't pressurize further. But where it stops and cannot pressurize further is a hard right angle in quantum space. You're looking at it. So what it encounters is the external force, which from the inside to the surface, at the surface, is also orthogonal. And so the centrifugal force holding the circle at its radius is forced sideways onto the sphere. The force coming in, which balances the centrifugal force, creating the circle at the center of space-time, we'll just call it, but it's actually space orthospace. The orthospace is on the circle. It will take a while. You'll have to master this first before I show you the geometry of the inside of the circle, which is hyperspheric. But the surface is simply the intersection of two force fields. It's the intersection of the out sphere going in with the in sphere going out. That makes light speed. We interpret it as space-time, and here's why. The circle, which represents 1, 1, is one space to one something else. We know that it's spatial because that makes the spatial center. But it also makes a right angle in spherical space on which must be the reciprocal of the centripetal force. But you can see that that makes the circle the union, the conjugal union, the multiplicative union, which is cross multiplication, which is at a right angle in spherical space, that means that the circle, which is 1, 1, is 1 part space per 1 part contraspace. And now we need to find out what's in contraspace, which is one of the conjugal aspects of this circle. So this circle is not completely spatial, and it's also not completely contraspatial. But it represents the right angle between two forces. What are those forces? One of the forces is the forces that is associated with space. I think you know what that is. It's protonic gravity. So what's the other one? We've identified one of the particles and one of the fundamental forces that's pulling in from it's pulling the outside in, but it can only pull the outside into a surface because there's another force that is conjugal with protonic gravitation. That is electronic centrifugality. So the electron is the contraparticle to the proton, and those are the only two particles. There are no other particles, period. There are no other particles. So the solution to the Democritus enigma of the smallest bit of material is now solved. This also solves a whole list of paradoxes, which we'll be able to get into eventually, but that's 3 hours. And I think that's enough. I hope this helped you. I may not be around much longer, and I'm just going to tell you explicitly, unless someone interviews me, this information will be lost. No one will benefit from my insights. That would be a tragedy. It would be a crime against humanity for me to withhold this information. And so I've devoted the last 3 years of my life thus far to exposing the truth that you can perhaps use for your own human equation. I guarantee you, you'll be wiser than all your teachers if you get this, and you'll be, eventually, as I am, the happiest man on earth, assuming you solve your moral dilemma as well. There's a source in the universe for the answers to both of those questions. I already dealt with the emotional, religious side, the philosophical side. Once you've had black, you can't go back. I love to tell stories. Stay tuned. Keep looking up, although it may be raining. It's raining here. I've got to have some breakfast, some more drugs, got to get some beer, be soused by the next time you see me, and I'll give another 3-hour lecture that'll be 1,000,000 times better than the one that you just saw. The greatest lecture ever delivered in the past 200 years. If you don't believe that, sign off, sucker. Pack your fanny pack. I don't want to go there. I need more coffee, more drugs, more oxygen, more water, more beer. And don't you think this double Windsor nut? I hope someone leaves a comment. Oh my God, I would love to tie a double Windsor nut. Can you tell me how to do it? All right, that's enough levity. Stay tuned, and thank all of you who are leaving comments. There are about 3 or 4 top-notch commentators. There've got to be thousands of you. Very soon or I'll be gone. I don't ask for money, and I fuckly don't need your attention. I'm doing this under the orders of heaven to give you guidance on the way of heaven. And we'll be right back. Stay tuned.